and good morning, everyone. I want to thank Gabby and the leadership team for putting this presentation together. I had the opportunity to be interviewed by Michael Bossart a couple of weeks ago in your guys' team meeting regarding hurricane season. If you don't know, on June 1st began hurricane season for the Gulf Coast. And so they interviewed me, and a lot of questions were answered out of that. And Michael had asked, he said, hey, this would be a great subject to have a presentation on. And I said, well, it so happens that I've already created a presentation for it that we've delivered to other market centers, and we'd love to deliver it to you, to Canterbury Memorial. So thank you to Gabby again and the leadership team for allowing us to present today. I'm going to share my screen. And let's see, yeah, we're gonna share this one. Perfect. Let me, can you guys see this where it says top page?
Yeah, we can see your presentation.
So the subject of this class is how to hurricane-proof your transaction. And let me make sure, yeah, perfect. Yeah, so the subject of this class is how to hurricane-proof your transaction. As I mentioned, we're in hurricane season, and hurricane season means a lot of things to a lot of people, but specifically for realtors, if there are a lot of things that we need to account for during hurricane season that really don't relate to the real estate industry outside of hurricane season. And we're going to talk about those things. Some of them do relate year round, but we're going to talk about that and educate you guys on that, so that you can be prepared for what is now hurricane season. So it mentions here, what we will cover is when insurance companies stop writing insurance. That is called a moratorium. And that's important for you guys to know, because if you have a buyer that's scheduled to buy a home, and if a moratorium is in place, like what just happened a couple of weeks ago with Cristobal, then your clients can't get insurance, and as a result can't close. We're going to talk about how to avoid those closings due to named storm. We're going to talk about a very important product called wind-driven rain. We're going to touch on flood insurance and the importance of it. And we're also going to talk about elevation certificates and the importance of it. So that being said, let's first begin with when insurance companies stop writing insurance due to moratoriums. The definition of a moratorium is authorized period of delay or a waiting period set by an authority. You see here, hurricane season goes from June 1 to November 30th. And so a moratorium, guys, is just when the insurance companies, again, stop writing insurance, because if there's a storm out in the Gulf of Mexico and it's going to be making landfall, then insurance companies will stop writing because they don't want that exposure. They don't want people to say, oh, I'm only going to buy insurance when I need it. And they see a hurricane out in the Gulf of Mexico and decide, okay, I'll go ahead and buy insurance. And then they cancel it after. This is their method of preventing that from occurring. So when does a moratorium go into effect? A moratorium goes into effect at the 80-degree west longitude and 20-degree north latitude when a storm hits the Gulf of Mexico in that area, which is, and I'm going to show you a picture in a moment, but that's basically in the middle of the Gulf of Mexico. When that happens, insurance companies will stop writing insurance. Also, if the storm is named, now they will stop writing even if the storm isn't named, but all insurance companies differ. And so when will the moratorium be lifted? It's once the storm no longer threatens property that's been designated. Let's see, do we have any questions so far? We don't. Okay, good. Oh, hang on just a second. Let's open up these chats. Is anybody having a hard? I can hear perfectly. Can we get a copy of the slides? Yes, I will provide you guys a copy of the slides. We'll just need to make sure that Michelle, our marketing director, is taking down everybody's name and phone number, or at least their name. We have access to the phone roster as Cadewood Memorial's insurance partner, and so we will get that out to you guys. When will the moratorium be lifted? It's lifted after there's no danger. So for those of y'all that were here during Hurricane Harvey, the moratorium didn't get lifted for almost 3 weeks. And so we pray that we never have another event like that. But if we do, we want to make sure that we account for that. And we're going to talk about how to do that in a moment. Here's the picture I was going to tell you guys. I'm not a sailor. And so when you tell me 20-degree latitude, 80-degree longitude, it doesn't register for me. I'm a very visual learner. But if you can imagine with me right here, if you can see my cursor, when a storm gets to this area right here, right around where that G is in Gulf of Mexico, that's when insurance companies are going to enact the moratorium. Now, what our agency does is when we see storms coming in this area around the Yucatan, we already are taking measures to prevent that from occurring. Just a moment. So be aware of that. That's where the moratorium begins. All right, continuing on. We are expecting a very busy 2020 hurricane season. I hope that the predictions are wrong, but in my industry, we prepare for the worst and hope for the best. And so we've already seen these 3 storms, Cristobal, and so we need to prepare ourselves as best we can for that event. Continuing on, how to avoid delays in closing is number 1, you want to have an insurance partner. You want to get insurance quotes for your clients, your buyers during the option period. You want to start the process sooner to get a quick turnaround, and you want to bind policies in advance. Start the policies ahead of time. Let's unpack that a little bit more. Let's relate it to a real estate transaction. So I'm gonna pick on Bill for a moment. So Bill, we want to have an insurance partner. So as if you identify, if your client, if you're representing a buyer and they put an offer in on a home over the weekend, well, today you're going to want to, now that they're in that option period, once that offer has been accepted, you want to go ahead and get insurance quotes for that buyer, so that we can identify any challenges that may occur during that option period. Ideally, you want to be getting insurance quotes during the option period so that we can determine flood zone determinations, we can run claim histories, we can obviously quote through the multiple carriers in which we quote through, because even though we brand ourselves as a farmer's agency, we write through 20 different insurance companies. And so all of those things are important that we do during the option period. Now, once those quotes have been presented to Bill's buyer, the other thing that's important is that the insurance company that you're working with, let's say it's us, that we recognize that if the storm like Cristobal that occurred a little over 2 weeks ago, once we realized that it was coming into the Gulf of Mexico, we began binding policies immediately. Typically insurance policies are not bound until about 2 weeks prior to closing. We might send documentation over to the lender, but we don't actually, most insurance companies won't bind them, meaning that the paper is actually being printed. What we did during Cristobal, and we always do, is even though it was June 1st when Cristobal was coming, we bound our policies all the way out to June 30th, because we needed to make sure that Bill's buyers were clear to close on June 30th. The moratoriums have been lifted now, but you just never know. So we did that for all of our referral partners in advance. Let me make sure there aren't any questions. So this one person asked, does this affect renters insurance as well? The answer to that question is yes. And not only does it affect renters insurance, but let's expand on it a little bit more. It not only affects home insurance, it affects renters insurance, it affects auto insurance. Okay, insurance companies aren't going to write an auto policy when there's a hurricane coming into the Gulf of Mexico. So all of these things are affected. Life insurance is not affected, but insurance like that is affected. Let's see, I won't be, okay, that's Michelle was mentioning that if you don't sign into the Zoom call with your full name, we won't be able to follow up. So you can message her, check in the chat. You can message her if you want this information, if you haven't logged in with your full name, and she can get these slides over to you. Okay, let's continue on. And actually, let me back up a little bit. Are there any questions that I can answer for anybody about moratoriums or things of that nature that we've talked about up to this point? I'm getting a question here from Carolina, and it is, what do you need to have the policy bound ahead of time? The only thing you need to do is to have your client talking to us. For example, if we did a quote for somebody, let's say we did a quote on June 1st, and we saw that the storm was coming in on June 2nd or 3rd. All we need, Carolina, is authorization from the client. What we do is we call the client and say, hey, Mr. Client, we are binding your policy today, provided that you don't object. They may say, oh, well, that deal busted out. I'm not buying that house after all. Okay, no problem. But really, we don't need anything. Everything we need is done. We have what we call binding authority with all of our carriers that we write through, all of the insurance companies, those 20 different companies. So Carolina, we don't even need money. And so we'll just bind the policy knowing that the money will be coming at closing. Let's see if there's anything else. I think those are the only questions I've been asked up to this point. So we're going to continue on. What we're going to talk about now is the importance of wind-driven rain. This is a product, guys, that I very often see left off of home insurance policies. And a client or an insurance person, an insurance purchaser, doesn't realize they don't have it until after it's too late when they file a claim. It's wind-driven rain is rain that is driven into your home by wind, typically through an opening, being propelled by wind. So let me give you an example of that. An example would be when a hurricane comes in or a tropical storm, the rain is driving sideways because of the wind. And so if it comes in through the window, if it comes in through the easements of the home, any way it can find entry into the home, that is what's considered wind-driven rain. Most policies don't automatically cover that. You have to add it. And a lot of insurance professionals don't add it because either A, they don't know about it, or B, they don't care enough to pause to speak to their client, your client, about that important coverage. It is a separate endorsement. You need to find out if your policy has it. If you want to know whether you have it or not, you can reach out to our agency. We're going to give out our phone number in a moment, and we can let you know whether you have it. Flood insurance does not cover wind-driven rain, and as it mentioned, we often see it missing. Let me just see if I'm missing any questions. Catherine asks, is WDR the same with windstorm insurance? Catherine, the answer is yes. So in some areas of Houston, guys, home insurance and weather insurance is written separate of one another. For example, Galveston County, Brazoria County, Chambers County, all of these counties, the weather is written separately of the home insurance. And so that weather insurance does not automatically include wind-driven rain, Catherine. You must know to endorse the policy with it. Now, if your clients are working with our agency, we're going to automatically endorse it. And we're going to educate your buyer and say, hey, Mrs. Buyer, we've added this endorsement for wind-driven rain. It costs about $80 for the year, but this is what it does. And we would like to include this in your policy unless you object to it. And if they object, that's okay. You say, oh no, I don't want to spend the $80 for that, James. No problem. I just need you to sign something acknowledging that you are knowingly eliminating this from the policy. What 95% or more insurance companies do is they never tell the buyer. The buyer doesn't know. They're not an insurance expert. And so that's my responsibility, is to be the insurance expert. And then they file a claim a year or 2 or 3 years later and realize, well, I didn't know I didn't have that. And that I can't tell you how many times I've been involved in a situation like that where people call us and say, James, my neighbor or the person I sit next to at church told me to call you because you're smart and my insurance agent isn't. So can you provide me with a quote? And of course we do. That's wind-driven rain, and that's the importance of it. It's important at all times, but it's most especially important during hurricane season, because that's most often where we see wind-driven rain claims occur. Any questions about wind-driven rain before we move on to flood insurance? Very good. Okay, let's talk about the importance of flood insurance. Let's read the statement. With Harvey, an estimated 13 million people were affected. Nearly 135,000 homes were damaged, and up to 1 million cars were wrecked or flooded. According to FEMA, more than 25% of flood damages occurred outside of the special flood zone areas. Okay, let me say that in a different way. 25% of the flooding that occurred these are people that didn't require flood insurance. They didn't have to have it, but they still flooded. So just because you're in what we call a preferred zone where you don't have to purchase flood insurance doesn't make you immune from flooding, any more than if you're in a what we call a non-preferred zone, or what y'all call a 100-year floodplain, that you're guaranteed to flood. There is no guarantee and there's no non-guarantee. And so it is important that, for me, it is important that we advise all of our clients about flood insurance. And we always do that while we're quoting it for them, while we're quoting their home insurance. It mentions here that flooding can affect anyone. It is the most costly natural disaster in the US. Y'all, let me tell you, and I think all of you know this already, but short of fire, nothing makes a bigger mess in your house than water. Water is not supposed to be in your house other than your sinks and your bathtubs. But during Harvey and other events that we've seen since Harvey, water has made an absolute mess. Our agency is the largest writer of flood insurance for farmers in the country. Nobody writes more flood insurance for their clients than our agency. It may not be required, but it is always recommended. And flooding is not covered by home or weather insurance. You need to have a separate policy in order to be able to do that. Any questions about that before we continue? All right, perfect. Now, let's talk about, I want to educate everybody on this call. And so pay attention to this slide because it is so important for you guys. It's so very important. Flood has become, since Harvey, probably the most frequent question that I am asked as an insurance professional and our team. We have 14 of the smartest and kindest people that you will ever want to meet that work in our agency. And we field flood phone calls all the time for realtors. So follow this. In our industry, in the insurance industry, we use a term called preferred flood zones. You guys call that a 500-year floodplain. When you're filling out the seller's disclosure, that's what it's called, a 500-year floodplain, okay? What that language means in our industry is we call that preferred. Now I'm gonna skip a moment and I'm gonna come back. Then you have what we call non-preferred, or what you guys call a 100-year floodplain, okay? If that language is foreign to you, then let's set up a one-on-one conversation so I can educate you guys about that. In a preferred zone, that means typically the lender will not require flood insurance of your buyer. Again, it doesn't mean that they're immune from flooding. It just doesn't mean, it means that they're not required to have it. Those zones in the insurance industry typically begin with these 4 letters. You don't have to know these letters, that's our language. But this is what we use when we're talking about flood insurance. It also means this EC is an acronym. An elevation certificate typically is not required to provide flood insurance when it's in a 500 or preferred flood zone. As it relates to a non-preferred zone, or what you guys call a 100-year floodplain, typically those zones begin with A, AE, or V, or VE zones. Typically the lender will require flood insurance of your buyer. and an elevation certificate is typically required. Okay. Now, how do you know whether a home that you're listing or a home that your buyer is looking to purchase is in a preferred or non-preferred zone, a 500 or 100-year floodplain? Well, it should be indicated on the seller's disclosure. But if you're representing the seller, your seller is filling out seller's disclosure, you can go to this link right here. It is the most up-to-date flood insurance information that exists. HAR has a place where you can go, but it is not, last I checked, and I checked about 2 weeks ago, it is not updated with the current flood maps that were changed last year. So be aware of that. Use this, and it will tell you the home's flood zone determination. We've gotten a couple of questions real quick. Let's see. Let me back up here. Why is a house shown in an AE zone in FEMA map, but an insurance agent quoted me the house is in an X zone? That came from Catherine. Catherine, what I would tell you is if you're looking it up and it's in an AE, but it was quoted in an X, there's a couple of reasons that could be. But I would encourage you to reach out to another insurance company. If it was us that told you it was an AE, then we have 3 different portals by which we can look it up and we can verify it. But if we have not looked it up for you, I would encourage you to call our office so that we can look that up for you and get that determined correctly. Here's a question from Philip. Is all flood insurance priced the same, no matter from whom one person quotes it? Thanks, Philip. Good question, Philip. I answer that question in this way. If flood insurance is quoted correctly, very often the flood insurance is the same price. Yes, because generally we all buy it from the same place. There are private flood carriers that we write through. But generally it should all be the same price. But the caveat to that is it quoted correctly? I'll give you an example. Earlier this month, we had a client this realtor was representing the seller, and we had quoted the seller's flood insurance in advance for $600. Well, the buyer, who was being represented by a non-KW agent, got a quote for flood insurance for $4,000. So the deal was about to bust out, and the agent called and said, hey, can you help me save this deal? So the buyer called us, and sure enough, the quote should have been $600 because there's a tool called Built Into Compliance that this home was eligible for, that the insurance agent that they were using either didn't know about or for whatever reason chose not to use it. And the buyer asked me, well, how can you quote it for $600, but this guy's quoting at $4,000? And I told her not to be arrogant, but I'm smarter than him. And so I don't mean to be prideful, but as I mentioned, we're the largest writer of flood insurance in the country for farmers. So we know a lot about flood insurance. And so in answer to your question, Philip, again, if it is quoted correctly, then yes. But man, I got to tell you, Philip, of all of the things that I see my peers mess up, flood insurance is at the top of that list because that information is ever changing, and you really have to be up to date on flood insurance in order to do it at the level at which our agency does it. There's another question. How can we obtain an elevation certificate? I saw that title company charges my buyer to obtain an elevation certificate, but they didn't give us a copy during closing. Okay, that's 2 questions. Number 1, how do you obtain an elevation certificate? You obtain if number 1, there's not a database where elevation certificates exist. So if you're representing a buyer and the home is proven to be in a non-preferred zone or a 100-year floodplain where an elevation certificate is required, you need to ask the seller for one. Okay, ask the seller, hey, I need a copy of your elevation certificate. If they say, well, I don't have one, or I don't know where it is, well, you need to get one. So have them get it. If you're representing the seller and your seller doesn't have one, well, then you get it from the survey company. So you can talk to the title company if you'd like, and they can order it on your behalf, or have a survey partner and reach out to them and say, hey, I need to get a survey on this home. And so we typically use in our agency, and I'll just put those names out there. You can use wherever you want, but Survey One and ProServe are the two companies that we typically partner with. Survey One and ProServe, and they can get you an elevation certificate. If they're out there doing a survey already, they'll cut you a little bit of a break because they're out there already. It's a whole different group of numbers that needs to be measured when they're doing an elevation certificate. So they're not just going to do it at no cost. But an elevation certificate, in my experience, costs anywhere from $300 to $400. But it is needed. Again, it's only needed when the home's in a non-preferred zone. And just to make it really easy on you guys, if you're working with us, we're going to tell you. We're going to say, hey, let's see, Catherine, we've already quoted the flood insurance on this home and elevation certificate isn't required. Or we're going to say, hey, Catherine, this home is in a non-preferred zone in a 100-year floodplain. We need a copy of the elevation certificate. Do you have it? And there are other ways that we can go and get those elevation certificates, like contacting the seller's insurance company, a number of things that we can do. But it all begins with, we got to be working with you, right? Because if I don't know that you have a buyer, if you haven't put them in contact with our team, I can't help you. And so let's see, we have another question from Lisa. Do the new FEMA maps reflect the flooding in Harvey? I had heard that those updates wouldn't be for another year or two, just making sure. How was reservoir release treated in the new maps? That came from Lisa Ritchie. Lisa, you're correct. The flood map changes that occurred last year, and we had changes in Harris, we had changes in every county in Houston last year. Homes were moved from 100 year to 500 year. Some were moved from 500 year to 100 year. Not all of them changed, but some of them did. But the changes that occurred were not a result of Hurricane Harvey. They were a result of the flood maps change about, the data that they use to change flood maps is about 8 to 10 years old. And so that information, the changes that just occurred were from 8 to 10 years ago. We won't see the impact of Harvey in the maps until likely 2018, because Harvey occurred in 2008. And that's not to say that everyone will be moved. Don't think, Katy, take the Addicks Reservoir. They took on a lot of water out there. But I really believe that the National Flood Insurance Program is going to look at that and say, hey, they flooded because the Addicks got released, right? And there's an argument, could have been released early, so I really think they're going to take that into account. But you're absolutely right, Lisa. This is not the result of Harvey. Let's see, the audio is cutting out. Oh man. I've got a question. How long is the elevation certificate valid indefinitely? Okay, I've got another question from Catherine and Jack. That was your question. How long are the elevation certificates valid? They're valid indefinitely. You might want to get it updated, because what we see, guys, is we see an elevation certificate created, and then somebody makes changes to the house, especially down in coastal areas where it was built up on stilts, and then they close in a portion of the bottom floor, but the elevation certificate doesn't reflect that. But if your buyer's buying it, now that they're inheriting the seller's problem, which is another reason we need to be talking to your buyers. Catherine has another question. A house currently has flood zone X or a preferred zone. The house was never flooded, but FEMA changed their map and currently lists the home in an AE. I heard there is a grandfather clause. Would the buyer on the house inherit the X zone under the grandfather clause? All right, so good question, Catherine. Let me say that in a different way. So as I mentioned earlier, a lot of homes were remapped last year. If you got remapped from a preferred zone, meaning you didn't have to purchase flood insurance, but you got remapped into a non-preferred zone where now you are required to carry flood insurance, there is a clause that you can use that allows you to maintain that preferred or X zone, provided that you do it within 1 year of that flood map change. And that, Catherine, is how we were able to get that person's flood insurance from $6,000 to $400. That's what we used. And so again, all the more reason why it is so important that you be talking to ideally our office. I'm just going to say it. I've been talking about having an insurance partner. I'm just going to put it out there, Bill. I want you to hire me because we're really good at what we do, and I can put out a fire, but I'm more interested in preventing them. And if we can talk to your buyers, all of you guys that are on this call during the option period, we can prevent this from occurring. Lisa asked, so the grandfather can apply to a new buyer of the home that has been remapped. Yes, Lisa, it can, provided that the insurance company knows to do it. There are a number of ways to keep flood insurance costs down. You can grandfather it, built into compliance, assuming the seller's policy. There's all kinds of things you can do that we know how to do. But in order to help your buyer do that, obviously we've got to be in conversation with them. Okay, I knew flood insurance was going to be a hot topic. It always is, but we're going to keep going because we've got some other slides to get to, and we can come back to this in a moment. Now we talked about the elevation certificate. Is somebody saying something? Okay. Hey, Kate, I hear some background for some people. If you're not talking, can you mute yourself, please? Okay, perfect. Now we're talking about the elevation certificate. Somebody asked, where do you get one? Let me tell you what an elevation certificate is. It's a document. It documents a property location's flood zone, building characteristics, and most importantly, the elevation of its lowest floor. I'm going to talk to y'all about that in a moment. Does every property need an elevation certificate? The answer is no. Typically, only properties that are in a non-preferred or 100-year floodplain need an elevation certificate. If you're working with a buyer or a seller and they are in a preferred zone, you don't need an elevation certificate generally to quote flood insurance, and it's the same price. It's going to be about $490 for the year to get $250,000 of flood insurance. How do I get an elevation certificate? You can purchase it from a surveyor, and it's typically done at the appraisal. How much does an elevation certificate cost? There are some companies that do it for as low as $250. The challenge with these companies is it takes longer to get typically, but typically it's in the range of about $400 to $600. How long does it take? Usually about 2 to 7 days. Could it help me get a more favorable rate? Absolutely, it can help you get a more favorable rate. And then the seller may have one. If not, the lender can order it for you or the title company during the appraisal process. Let's see, I think we have a question real quick. No question, but I'm going to go ahead and read this because it's saying good stuff about us. James and his team are the best at what they do. Clients first, and they take care of them. My only partner in insurance for sure. Thank you, Matthew Johnson. I appreciate you. Okay, let's see. Continuing on. Guys, this is what an elevation certificate looks like. Okay, and again, this is related to flood insurance. This is what it looks like. It'll say elevation certificate at the top. And you don't have to know how to read these, so I'm not going to bore you with that. But we do, and we understand them at a very high level. This is another one of those important slides. I need everybody's attention. If your spouse or your children are tugging at your leg, I need you to tell them to give you 3 minutes. Just tell them to give you 3 minutes because this slide is uber important. Now watch this. You see this line right here? It's an acronym. It's called BFE. It stands for Base Flood Elevation. That elevation certificate, y'all, that is what it will tell us. It will tell us, hey, James, the base flood elevation for this particular area is this dotted line. That's what the elevation certificate tells us, which is why it's so important. The other important thing the elevation certificate tells us is it tells us how high the home is above the base flood elevation, right? That's why that document is so important. And so again, this only applies if the home is in a non-preferred zone or a 100-year floodplain. Now look at this. If the home is 3 feet above the base flood, even though it's in a non-preferred zone, the cost of the insurance is only $446 for the year, right? It's $450, great price point. So let's buy that house, right? It's 3 feet above base flood. Sometimes we look at the elevation certificate and the home is at base flood, meaning it's even with it. Now this is the same house, but look, because it's not 3 feet above base flood, instead it's at base flood, the same house, the insurance goes to $1,950 for the year, almost $2,000. Why? Because water rolls downhill. And the lower you are, the more likely you are to potentially get water. Now watch this. Some homes, in this example, are 4 feet below base flood. And as a result, this same house, instead of costing $450, costs $5,000 to insure. Why? Because it's below the base flood elevation. And again, we're going to go back to it. That's what this document right here tells us. I call the elevation certificate the gospel. It is the gospel. It tells us how much flood insurance is going to cost. And without it, some homes we can quote without it, but we typically do not recommend quoting flood insurance without an elevation certificate because, again, if you're in a non-preferred zone, because we can quote it at this level right here, but the home could be at this level. And now your buyer walks away from this home because they don't want to spend $2,000 in flood insurance when in reality they only needed to spend $450. That's what the elevation certificate does. We've got a question real quick. Sure, that's what it stands for. Oh, okay. Yeah, I think Jack's got a sense of humor. Jack, I grew up on a dirt road in East Texas. So I know the other acronym for BFE. So I'm a country kid, and believe me, I know what the other acronym for BFE is. If y'all don't know, reach out to Jack; he'll tell you. But in this example, it means base flood elevation. So, hang on a second. I think I skipped the slide. Yeah. All right. Any questions about the elevation certificate and the importance of it? All right, good. Again, only needed if the home is in a 100-year or non-preferred zone. Now, let's talk about this. In the last 3 to 5 years, there's been a huge movement in the insurance industry towards what we call private flood insurance. So there's 2 different types of flood insurance. There's NFIP, or the National Flood Insurance Program, which is FEMA, government flood insurance, which has historically always been where we purchase flood insurance. But in the last 3 to 5 years, we've really seen a lot of companies go into private flood insurance. And private flood insurance is great. We write through 4 or 5 different private flood insurance companies within our agency. They won't write everything. Some things they'll write and some things they won't. The National Flood Insurance Program will write everything. But be aware of this. The National Flood Insurance product is offered through FEMA. Every policy is eligible. You can buy up to $250,000 for property or for structure and $100,000 for contents. That's the max they'll sell. And all lenders accept it. Okay, everybody accepts it. But watch this. Private flood insurance is great, but it's offered by private flood companies. Like these are some of the companies we write through: Aon Edge, Lloyd's, companies like them. Oop, hang on. If your client is working on an FHA loan, it will not accept private flood. So if you're a buyer, it has an FHA loan, you cannot use private flood. And y'all, I see it all the time. People get a couple of days before closing or at the table, and they realize, oh, you have an FHA loan, and this is private flood insurance. You can't use that. And now all of a sudden there's a problem. Again, we can fix that problem, but we're more interested in preventing it. The coverage, but on the other hand, private flood, we can use private flood to go above 250 if needed. Another benefit of private flood is it doesn't require a 30-day waiting period. The National Flood Insurance Program does, unless it's a real estate transaction. If it's a real estate transaction, you don't have to do it. And again, private is not available for all homes. Our agency writes through both. And so, again, I go back to, you don't have to know all of this. You just have to know somebody smart that does. And our agency knows it. Let's see. Any questions about private flood versus the National Flood Insurance Program? Okay, we're going to keep going. All right, we're going to kind of summarize some of this stuff. We're getting towards the end. The bottom line is this: the option period is essential for insurance. If you're not getting your clients to be getting insurance quotes during the option period, you are underserving them. And I hope that's not too harsh, but I'm just going to say it. You're underserving them. I heard a Bold coach 8 years ago, and I've been through Bold. I'm a Bold graduate. I heard this Bold coach say, and I'll never forget it. She said, until you realize that you, the realtor, are the most important part of any real estate transaction, you will never fully realize your potential as a realtor. And that was a very powerful message, to the point where 8 years later, I'm still regurgitating it. I was talking at KW Platinum this morning up on 290, and I made that same statement to them. Control the transaction. It's not their mother-in-law. It's not their neighbor. It's not them even. That's the smartest person in this real estate transaction. It's you, or at least that's what they hired you to be. And if you don't believe you're the most important part of a real estate transaction, get into coaching, because they'll train you and show you how to be that true advocate for your clients. During this option period, we're going to again confirm the home's flood zone determination. We're going to run a claims history report for your buyers, and we're going to quote the home insurance for you. The other thing that I want you to know is have a process. I hear people all the time tell me, James, I want to get my clients to you, but I just don't know how. Or, hey, James, I sent my buyer to you last week. Did they call you? No, they didn't call me. You know why? Because when you're working with a buyer, they're busy. They were busy before they started buying a home, but now they've got their personal life. They're being a father, being a husband, a wife, being a parent, being whatever they do for a living. And they've got the lender wanting information, the title company wants information from them, the insurance company wants information. So you need to have a process. We have a referral email that we use for all of our referral partners that we would love to share with you guys. And in that email, it gets, let me see, is there a copy of it? No, it's not. So in that email, we have a copy of it. And when we reach out to you guys, if you want a copy of it, we can share it with you. But it's an email that goes out to the buyer that says, hey, Mrs. Buyer, congratulations, your offer has been accepted. Your lender is going to require insurance on this home, and you can use whomever you want, but James is my insurance partner, and I've CC'd him on this email. He'll be reaching out to you. Now, we're not calling them, we're just emailing them. And then we reply to your email and say, hey, congratulations on your new home, Mrs. Buyer. And on making, as Elizabeth mentioned, we are her insurance partner. Our role in your option period is going to be to do the following. And y'all, it's like Gary says, success is simple, not easy. And this is super simple. When a buyer's agent sends that email out, we connect with the buyer about 90% of the time. They reply to the email, we get the information that we need, we prepare a quote, we present the quote, and then about 80% of the time, 8 out of 10 times, we are able to earn that client's business, which is a very high close ratio, because for our industry, the average close ratio is about 12%. We're running at about 80. Why? Because we have great referral partners like you, and we have an incredible group of people here that service your clients. And so have that system, and we'll talk to you again one-on-one about how to leverage that system. Even though hurricane season is from June 1 to November 30th, you'll need insurance year round. And so be aware of that, that I don't want to be your insurance partner just during, oh, I'm getting a little ahead of myself. I don't want to be your insurance partner just during hurricane season. I want to be your insurance partner always. We've got a couple of questions. Hang on. Carolina asks, is there flood insurance for renters to cover damage to furniture, computers, etc.? Can you buy a mix, the first $250,000 through FEMA and over that for private? Carolina, that's a great question. To answer that question, yes, you can buy flood insurance for if you're a renter and obviously you only need flood insurance for your contents. You can purchase that at a very reduced cost. Or let's say you're a landlord. Let's say you own the home and you lease it out to someone else. You can just buy flood insurance to insure the home, because the contents are not your responsibility. And then to your second question, yes, let's say you live in a $500,000 home and you are, and you can only buy flood insurance from the National Flood Insurance Program up to $250,000. But what about the other $250,000? Yes, you can have a mix of those. You can have a $250,000 through the National Flood Insurance Program, and then another $250,000 through the private flood program, thereby getting you to $500,000. And we do that. We do that often. Let's see, what other questions? Yeah, okay, perfect. Catherine asked, how much more expensive is private flood insurance compared to the National Flood Insurance Program? Catherine, I'll answer that question in two ways. Number one, sometimes we find that private flood insurance is less expensive than the National Flood Insurance Program, okay? So we typically will quote through both to find out which one is better for the client. And then we always ask the client, hey, do you have a conventional loan or a FHA loan? And if they say, well, we're going FHA, well, then we don't even present the private flood insurance. We'll talk to the agent sometimes and say, hey, can this get moved over to conventional? Because if it can, the flood insurance is going to be considerably less expensive. So we quote through both. There's not a hard rule that says one is less expensive than the other. But let me also answer that question in this way. Going back to the question about, $250,000 of private versus $250,000 through the National Flood Insurance Program and $250,000 through private. In that scenario, you can buy, if you're in a preferred zone, meaning you don't have to buy flood insurance, you just choose to, you can buy $250,000 worth of flood insurance for about $490 for the year, okay? But then if you want to buy another $250,000, it's going to be more expensive because it's private, right? They're for profit. The National Flood Insurance Program is not for profit, but the private flood carriers are. You'd probably spend another $700 to $800 to purchase the additional $250,000 that you would need to get in order to get to $500,000. Let's see, Carmen asks, when is the best time to purchase insurance or change insurance carriers? Thanks. I'll answer that question in two ways. Number one, if you're working with a buyer, the best time to purchase flood insurance or insurance in general is during the option period. I mean, day one. Just as sure as you're getting them to provide earnest money and schedule inspections, you guys need to be getting them over to your insurance partner. And I would like to apply for that job as KW Memorial's insurance partner. And not only are we KW Memorial's insurance partner, we're KW Signature's insurance partner in Katy. We're KW Preferred's insurance partner in Pearland. We're KW Clear Lake's insurance partner in Clear Lake. I just left Platinum, where we do a lot of work with them and the Loken Group. We have partners at Met. I mean, we work with all the Keller Williams offices in town, y'all. And I would love the opportunity to work with y'all just to be of help. Now, the other question that's asked is, when's the best time to change flood insurance or change insurance? You can change it anytime. Let's see, who's at? Carmen, I would tell you, you need to reach out to our office and let us evaluate your insurance, and we'll look at it with integrity and tell you if what you have is better than anything we can offer. We're going to tell you that and say, Carmen, stay where you are. Unless your insurance advisor is a bozo, you don't need to leave. Stay where you are. But guys, usually about 8 or 9 out of 10 times when I evaluate somebody's insurance, it's either a hot mess or it's close to it. And we're talking to them about, hey, you need to update this, you need to change that. This is how the policy really should be written. This is what you're missing. And they trust us, and then they end up moving their insurance to our agency. All right, let's continue on. I think those are the only questions. I'm getting a lot of thank yous. Let's go here. Have a script. You're going to be asked insurance questions by your buyers and other people. The script that I share with our Keller Williams partners is, hey, that's a good question, Mr. Buyer Seller. I'm going to have my insurance partner, James Acosta, call you so we can make the best decision for you and your family. Let's see, how many more? Okay, this is the last slide. Guys, this is the team. This is the team that makes it all run. We have an incredible group of people that I want to offer to you. This group of people are the #1 producing farmers agency in the city of Houston. They rank #1 in the state of Texas, and they finished 2019 rather, as the #16 producing agency in the country. There are 12,500 farmers agencies in the country, and we finished 16th, which is why KW Memorial trusts us. And it is a testament not only to these smart people, but it's a testament to you guys, because we work almost exclusively with Keller Williams agents, because I like smart, kind, and driven people. And I have found that there are an abundance of them at Keller Williams Market Centers. And so that's where we concentrate our efforts. And they can help you, but we can't help you if we are not in contact with your clients. We can't. Now, if something goes bad and you want us to fix it, call us. We can do that. But again, we're more interested in preventing fires than putting them out. And so give us that opportunity. We're going to be following up with you guys, and we can unpack the buyer's email in more detail so that you can leverage it, hopefully. If you have questions for me individually, reach out to Michelle, Michelle, if you can please put your email address or email information and phone number and contact information on there, the office number, again, just for everybody's review. And then let's see, Leela is asking us to send the referral email. We'll certainly send that to you, to those of you that take our call. We're not, if you partner with somebody else, that's okay. Hopefully they're servicing you at a high level. And if we need to be your second choice, then we'll do that. But if you want us to be your insurance partner, then we can share that email with you. Let's see, Isa is asking, hello, not sure if you already told, will you please tell lower and higher price range for flood insurance? Isa, as it relates to, if you're in a preferred zone, the flood insurance cost is going to be fixed. It's going to be about $490 to $500 for the year. If you're in a non-preferred zone, meaning the lender is going to require flood insurance of you, dear, it can be anywhere from $500 to $10,000. The way that it's going to be determined as to where in that area you fit in, from 500 to 10,000 or more, is that elevation certificate, Isa. If you're in a non-preferred zone, I get asked all the time, James, can you just estimate this flood insurance for me? I just need an estimate. If it's in a preferred zone, I can tell you exactly what it's going to cost. But if it's in a non-preferred, I'm sorry, Mrs. Client, I cannot estimate it because I need to see that elevation certificate in order to estimate it, because it's going to tell me how high or how low that home is in relation to the base flood elevation. Um, all right, let's see. Those are all the questions that I've been asked up to this point. I will tell you, I will put our agency up against any agency in the country, in large part because of the people that work in it. And of all the things that we do well, and they are numerous, we're endorsed by Dave Ramsey, if you know who he is, radio and TV personality and author. We're Dave's ELP for insurance. I mentioned our numbers earlier, how we rank. But when you combine a smart Keller Williams agent with our agency, and we work very closely with your lending partners, guys, we can create a great customer experience. But it all begins with you. I tell people, you're the engine that drives the train. If you're not getting us in contact with your buyers, then we can't help. And even if you need our help with a seller, we can help in that area. And so give us that opportunity if you'd like. Information is only as good as information is only good if you apply it. That's it. All of this information is great, but if you don't apply it in your real estate business, then it's not going to matter. And so allow us to apply that for you. Any other questions, or Gabby, do you want to close us out?
Hi there. I was just typing a big thank you to you.
No problem.
Guys, you have Michelle's information in there. So you can reach out to Michelle if you have any questions. You also have access to all of our preferred partners roster as well. So if you ever lose that, you have Michelle's contact information in the roster for preferred partners too. Perfect. And you can always ask any of us in the agent services if you ever need their information as well.
Thank you,
and
Gabby.
Thank you, James, again. This was like super informative. Even myself, I was taking notes.
Good.
For my own home.
Gabby, I failed to mention something, and I'll mention it very briefly. The other thing that we do within our agency is we have what we call our halo effect. And what that means is, if you can see my screen, these 6 people right here are what we call our account managers. Once we onboard a buyer from you guys, once we've earned their business and they've closed, they get assigned to one of these account managers. We service our own clients. So many of our competitors, once they write the policy, it's subbed out to a third party. They're somewhere else in the country or in the world. And when they call in to get help, whether it's changing a mortgage company because the loan's been sold, or adding a car, or whatever the case may be, they're talking to somebody else. They're talking to a 1-800 number somewhere. We service our own policies. And I'm going to use Danny as an example because she's my account manager for our agency. When we get a referral in, and we write the policy, 6 months later, if they call in to add a car, Danny or any of these account managers will always mention to them, "Hey, Mrs. Client, I see we came to know you from by Kate Ferguson with KW Memorial. We wanted to remind you of that. Yeah, have you spoken to Kate lately? Yeah, she sends me things in the mail and sends me emails." And then we remind them, hey, don't forget, if you know anybody that wants to buy, sell, or invest in real estate, reach out to Kate. And sometimes they'll say, my mom is talking about moving to Houston to be closer to her grandkids. Well, great, reach out to Kate and she can give you an update on the market. And then what we then do is, Kate, we're going to reach out to you and we're going to say, hey, your buyer that you referred to us last year, her mother is considering moving to Houston. You should reach out to her. We call it the halo effect. And many of our competitors can't do that because they don't service their own clients, but we do. And it's a value add to you. It's another way to touch your clients, like the MREA talks about. I forget how many touches are a year now. It recently changed. I don't know if it's 33 or 36. But you need to be touching your database, and we can touch them on your behalf. But again, only if we know that you have a buyer. So that's all I have for now. And thank you, Gabby. And thank you, KW Memorial. You guys have a great, productive week, and go help people.
Thank you, James. This was awesome. And thank you, everybody, for attending the class. Thanks, James.
Goodbye.
Thank you,
Bye.
James.
My pleasure.